that was such a dramatic entrance, wasn't it? Oh, so excited. Right, okay. I'm just making sure I'm setting up all of my different live streams. I've got this going on Instagram, and I've got it going on YouTube as well. So if there's anybody that, hopefully if they can't get into Facebook, they should have somewhere else they can get it. But I will be recording this as well. So if anybody is worried that they're not going to get the information, or they want to watch it back again, or they want to share it with somebody, no problem at all. It's going to be recorded. Okay. So I want to make sure that the people that are here with me can hear me, see me, all that kind of stuff. Because obviously I'll be talking to myself otherwise, so it'd be nice to know. I can see comments and things as well. I can't necessarily reply in the software that I'm using, but I'll do my best to sort of shout out comments and things like that. And if you give the permissions on Facebook, I can even sort of flash up your name as well, so we know who it is, because otherwise it just comes up like Facebook user. Yeah, so if you want to stay anonymous, that's fine, but if you also want to show your name, then just make sure the permissions are there. So fabulous. All right, well, I'm just having a look on here. So I've got Liz here with me. I've got my mother-in-law, Beverly. Hello, Beverly. And Alison as well. I think you are Emily's mum, if I'm not mistaken. And Nancy and Karen. Hello, Karen. She's hello. She's the one that's put this one on. Awesome. Okay, right. So I'm glad that everybody can hear me, see me, all that stuff. And I will do my best to keep an eye on comments and things as I can. If you're not on the Facebook group, it might be a little bit more tricky for me to kind of actually be able to answer your questions, but I'll do my best. All right. So we'll see how we go. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to present my screen, and it's going to go a little bit weird for a second while I just do this, so we make sure that we're in the right place. So hopefully, I'm just checking to make sure it looks right on the screen. Correct. Yes, there we go. All right, so hopefully you'll be able to see everything on there. I'm going to be sharing a link at the end for you to get some resources I'm going to talk about during this whole session. So if there is anything on here you think, oh, I'd like to have a look at that, don't worry, it's going to be there for you as well. Okay. So Karen's just asking, where's the link to give permission to show permissions? I'm not going to be able to do that right now. I think there's a way of doing it. I think you have to do something like facebook.com/StreamYard or something along those lines. It should have come up on the thing. If it hasn't, I'm sorry, but don't worry, it's not a problem. I can see on Facebook who's talking. So anyway, let's get on with it so that we're not all sitting around waiting for too long. So who am I? Right, well, I'm Dr. Nikki. Hopefully you'll know who I am because you're here, but if you don't and you just happen to have stumbled across this page and this group, I graduated from St George's Medical School down in Tooting in 2009, so I've been a doctor all of that time, and I initially started life as an obs and gynae trainee. So I did that for 4 years, in addition to my 2 years of kind of general foundation jobs and the 6 years at medical school as well. And then got to the end of that and thought, actually, I don't really enjoy being a surgeon. I don't really enjoy the stress of delivering babies. So I retrained. So I did some contraception training. I also decided to retrain as a GP because I thought, well, I can do the women's health that I enjoy and I love as a GP. So I finished that just before we hit lockdown. Excellent. That was a great timing. So not a lot happened while we were kind of firefighting all of that. But we came out of lockdown and I managed to convince my manager to let me stay on and start a women's health clinic at the urgent care centre. And we started that on the 1st of August. So if you're in Milton Keynes, we have a clinic that your GP, if your GP subscribes to the out of hours service, they can send you there. And very soon I'm going to be starting, hopefully, fingers crossed, my own private practice. I've had my CQC interview on Monday and apparently it went well, so there we go, watch this space. I've got no financial declarations to make. I'm not sponsored by anybody for doing this. And I do want to let you know that I take HRT and testosterone myself, and I'm doing the exercise and the healthy eating and everything that I'm going to be talking about in this session. So um, I I wouldn't say I'm perfect, but I certainly don't do anything that I wouldn't expect one of my ladies to do, or people that come and see me in my clinic. So I do want you to know that even though I'll say ladies and women, I'm doing my best to kind of be as inclusive as I possibly can. I'm not causing offense or anything. It's just my brain having to be conscious about it. So I want everybody to feel like they're included in this. That's, cis women, transgender men, non-binary people have been assigned a female at birth. As I said, I don't always get it right, but I'm happy to be respectfully called out on it. Okay. So if there is something I've said that you think, oh, don't do that, let me know. All right. So we're going to talk about some myths to begin with about menopause, because there are a lot out there and I see a lot of it on social media. I'm seeing it a lot in the menopause groups. There's just so much stuff out there. It's really overwhelming. So menopause is a natural process. You don't need treatment. I see that one a lot. You're too old to have HRT, or you're too young to have HRT. I see that one a lot as well. And I hear a lot of the women that come to the clinic will say that, my GP said that I'm too young to have menopausal symptoms. Taking estrogen means you're going to get breast cancer. Oh my God, I can't have HRT because I have breast cancer, or I can't have HRT because there's cancer in my family. So that's a big myth that I want you, hopefully by the end of this, you'll feel better about. Testosterone is a man's hormone and women don't need it. That's another myth. Just take supplements and exercise and you'll be fine. That's part of the treatment. So it's not entirely a myth. We do need to do those things, but some people need HRT. Okay. HRT makes you gain weight. That's an interesting one. I still firmly believe that it's the lack of the hormones that causes the weight gain, but some people would say actually not. So the jury may be out on that one, but I would not avoid, basically I wouldn't avoid HRT just because you're worried about gaining weight. You have to stop taking HRT after 5 years. When I first started training as a GP, that's the advice we were giving people. And that was only 3 years ago, 4 years ago. And I remember very distinctly having an argument with a woman who was in her late 60s, and she did not want to stop HRT. And no matter what I said to her, she just wouldn't stop it. And quite rightly so. Looking back now, I just was uneducated, but you don't have to stop just because somebody says 5 years or 10 years, that's it. More estrogen is better. That's not always the case. And actually, some people that are quite sensitive to hormones can find that too much estrogen actually makes things worse. And not taking HRT is bad. It seems that HRT has become this kind of panacea of all ills. A bit like just take supplements and exercise. It's not one extreme or the other. Sometimes you need a blend of everything. And some people can't have HRT, or they don't want to take HRT, and that's okay. Even if you sit through something like this and you decide, actually, I don't want to be on that, that's fine too, So see, Liz is already saying, oh, I've heard some of these. Yeah, it's so true. This is what we see online all the time. So there we go. So what is menopause? So just to give you some definitions, menopause is a retrospective diagnosis. So the actual point of menopause is 12 months after your periods have stopped. But this is not on hormonal contraception, because that will artificially make your periods stop earlier. I'm talking about people that are either on copper coils or not using any contraception at all, and their periods have stopped for 12 months. That is officially menopause. Now, there are some nuances to this. So some younger people, for example, might have other conditions going on that might cause their periods to stop, but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about actual menopause, okay? So up until that point, it's perimenopause. It can be really bad PMS or PMDD leading into perimenopause, but essentially before that point of menopause, it's perimenopause. It's around the time of the menopause. If this starts before the age of 40, it's called premature ovarian insufficiency, and it's a different diagnosis that I'm going to do a little bit on as well. So the average age of menopause, or perimenopause, actually, I should say, perimenopause in the UK is about 45 and upwards, which is why we use, a lot of people will say, oh, you're too young if you start getting symptoms at the age of 42 or 43. That's early perimenopause, but it's not. We shouldn't not be giving people things just because of their age. It's just an arbitrary figure. The average age of menopause, so when the periods have stopped, is 51 in the UK. But as you'll see on this diagram here on the right-hand side, it varies. So in Africa, it's a little bit younger. In Australia, it's a little bit older. So you'll see that across the world, globally, there are slightly different variations on this, and we have to be mindful of that as doctors as well, because if somebody comes from Africa and we're saying, oh no, this can't possibly be menopause, well, actually it may well be, because she'll hit it earlier than other people might. Now, premature ovarian insufficiency is a diagnosis that I was given at the beginning, almost this time last year, I suppose. Yeah, and it was basically out of the blue. I'd had a miscarriage in September, October last year, and basically my periods didn't come back properly. And I knew something was wrong because that's never happened to me before. And I went to see a gynecologist. She did my blood tests, and I don't know who was more surprised, her or me. But I didn't know very much about the condition. I went into complete panic mode, thinking, oh my God, what the hell's going on? So I had to do a lot of reading around it myself. I mean, somebody who's been in obstetrics and gynecology for years, and as a GP, I just didn't know about it. I wasn't taught about it. But spontaneous premature ovarian insufficiency actually affects women, around 3% of women before the age of 40. And it's not menopause. It's not the same as menopause, because there is some ovarian function, so it can come and go. It can affect women right the way down to the age of 12 because of a genetic problem or something like that that's happened, which means they don't go into puberty. But it can affect anybody all the way along that spectrum, and it tends to run in families, which it does in mine. And it's one of those things that happens, and unfortunately it's just it affected me, and that was it. 90% of women don't know why this happens to them. Now, I'm sure that will change. There's lots of research going on about the genetic causes of POI, but there are so many potential causes from a genetic standpoint anyway, that it's really hard to pinpoint one gene itself. So there's lots of things, but if somebody I'm suspecting is having POI, they're under the age of 40 and their blood tests come back positive, then I would be looking to investigate that, or at least get a geneticist involved to make sure that there's nothing else going on. That tends to be more the younger crowd, so the sort of women in their teens, 20s, that tends to have the genetic problems. Women in their 30s, it tends to be other things, or you just don't know. So as I said, the ovaries don't completely fail. About 5 to 10% of women can conceive naturally, and I've seen that a lot in the groups that I'm in. There's the group called the Daisy Network, which focuses just on POI, and that's surgical menopause as well as chemical menopause, because somebody's had treatments for cancer and things like that, and they've gone into menopause early. So it's not just for POI, but for all women in the younger years that have gone through it. And some of them do conceive naturally, and it can be a trigger point, and I think you have to make a decision yourself about what's right for you. And we decided not to go down the donor egg route, which is what we would have been offered, and we've decided to go down the adoption route. So that's a whole different story, and probably a whole different talk for another day, but there we go, that's what we're doing. So the diagnosis of POI, if you've got anybody in your life who is under the age of 40 and they think they might be going through this or starting to have signs of something like this, it's the periods are not quite right. Something, is either absent or very, very prolonged. It's a new change, something that perhaps hasn't happened before. Unless you're a teenager, of course, you don't really know what your periods are like. So if you usually like clockwork and all of a sudden they start going all over the place, you have to ask yourself what's going on there. Now, what we would do is we do a couple of blood tests. This is the point where we would do the menopause blood test, which is also another contentious topic, which I will go into in a bit. But essentially, if you do the follicular stimulating hormone, and you do that twice, and the levels are over 30 on those two blood samples, at least a month and a half apart, then that confirms the diagnosis. It doesn't always fit that, but that's the official diagnosis. The treatment is the same as I would tell somebody for perimenopause and menopause, but there are a few tweaks. So it's the lifestyle changes, stopping smoking if someone can do that, reducing their alcohol intake, reducing their caffeine intake, exercising, making sure they're getting their bones nice and strong, their muscles strength needs to continue, eating protein, things like that to help with their body's natural process of staying healthy. I would also give them a DEXA scan, so that looks at the bones health, looks at the density of the bones, because if you stop producing estrogen much earlier than you should do, really are increased risk of osteoporosis, which is thinning of the bones, and they break really easily. So when I had my DEXA scan done, it showed that I had thinning of the bones in my lower spine. So I'm working on that and making sure that I do everything to improve my strength training. And of course, taking HRT. So for women with this condition, HRT is pretty much mandatory. Unless there's a very, very, very good reason not to give somebody HRT, I can't think of any at all for younger women, unless there's something strange with the hormones going on, or a cancer or something that really can't have it. But most women with this condition must be on HRT to at least the average age of natural menopause, which is, as I've already said, was 51. It doesn't have to be HRT, that they can be on the combined pill, and there are all sorts of new ones coming out that can help with that, with more natural kind of estrogens in them. I've put on there urgent referral to a menopause specialist. So somebody that's done some extra training in menopause, doesn't necessarily have to be at a main centre, but it does help because they do understand it. So, somebody that has got more knowledge about this and will keep an eye on things and start the investigations off if they feel it's necessary. And, emotional support, checking out the Daisy Network is a really good one. So the other part of this as well, I notice a lot of, is women saying that their PMS, so their premenstrual syndrome symptoms, gets worse the closer towards perimenopause or menopause they get. And it's thought that perhaps it's on a bit of a spectrum. So it's the cause of this is this swings and the ups and downs of the hormones, particularly when the hormones drop. So that's why some women find that in that week leading up to their period, they can feel particularly bad. Some people are really sensitive to progesterone, and that's what it is. Other people are really sensitive to the drop in the hormones. Everyone's different. There's no one size fits all with this. But over time, those swings become much more erratic, and people start to notice that actually over time their symptoms are getting worse and worse. Now, it's managed in a very similar way, actually. We'd manage it with a combined pill if it was safe to use, because it gives someone an even spacing of hormones, or we would give somebody HRT. And so if somebody has got really bad PMS symptoms and they're coming up to their 40s, or they're in their 40s, and they're being told consistently, no, it's not anything to do with perimenopause, menopause, it might be this. It still can be perimenopause, but it could be this. So it's something to think about and see a specialist about if you can. Now, one of the things I'm going to share with you on the link that I told you about was this thing called the Green Climacteric Scale. You can print it off a couple of times, and I recommend that you keep an eye on your symptoms. So if you really want to try and convince somebody that things are not going well for you, use one of these. And actually what you do is you go against all of the different symptoms and you give yourself a score from 0 to 3, and then you add all of the scores up. So if you have, say, 10 items on here that all score a 3, that would be a score of 30. And then you'd add all your 1s together and all your 2s together. So if you had 5 2s, that would be 10. If you have 5 1s, it would be another 5. So 0 obviously doesn't give you anything. So it's looking at your overall score. And then if you do go on treatment, or if you want to do supplements or exercise or whatever it is, in 3 months and then in 6 months, you can do this repeatedly to see how things are improving. I had one lady yesterday, I was shocked, but also very pleased for her. Her level was 25 when we first spoke to each other 3 months ago. She repeated it just before she came to see me, and her level had gone down to 5. So that's the effect that the right treatment and the right management can have. So great tip there. Go and have a look at that if you can at some stage this week, and start recording your symptoms. You can download apps like Balance as well. It's a really good app that can help you to track your periods, but also track your symptoms on top of your periods as well. So how to start managing your menopause symptoms with your lifestyle changes. Now, I'm going to have other speakers at some stage when we've hashed out the details, because obviously today I had to cancel my in-person event that I was going to run because the venue let me down at the last minute. But we are going to reinstate that online. I just need to work out when the ladies are going to come and join me. And I've got a lovely nutritionist who's going to be talking to us about the kinds of foods and things you can do and the supplements you can use. I'm going to have another one of my lovely friends who's going to talk about yoga and movement. I've got another friend that's also very good at movement and helping with exercise around this time as well. So there's lots of things that you can do. There's lots of people out there that can help you if you're open to it. So things you can do. Stopping smoking, very important, particularly in the menopause. Our kind of our biological makeup, if you like, starts to become more like a man's. So it means that our cholesterol can go up, our blood pressure can go up, we can get weight developing around the middle because our body's trying to compensate for the lack of estrogen. So stopping smoking is really helpful because it reduces your further increased risk of, say, a blood clot developing or a stroke developing. Reducing your alcohol intake, again, it's reducing the calories, but it's also improving your health. Looking at low carb diets or Mediterranean style diets, things that are high in protein can be helpful. Again, it's not one size fits all, but those sorts of things can be helpful. Some people swear by intermittent fasting, other people say it makes them worse. Again, everyone's different. You've got to find something that works for you. Make sure that you're doing some load-bearing exercise. So it's not just about going swimming, although that's very good for your cardio, which is important. But you also need to be doing something that helps strengthen your muscles and strengthen your bones. So load-bearing exercise with weights, yoga, Pilates, all these things can help. Maybe taking some supplements. Vitamin D and calcium don't improve your risk of osteoporosis. HRT does that, but certainly to making sure that you're not vitamin D deficient and calcium deficient is very helpful, particularly if you have a restrictive diet or you're somebody that doesn't tend to go out, or you're quite covered, or you've got darker skin. So it's important to make sure that you're taking vitamin D. The dose of that would be around 400 international units every single day, particularly over the winter months, but you could take it all year round if you wanted to. Particularly if you've got darker skin tones, I would recommend that. And I've put good sleep on there, which, of course, if you're having hot flushes and hot sweats and all sorts of things at night and it's keeping you awake and the anxiety, I had all of that. It's hard to say go and get some good sleep when it's not happening. But certainly after I started HRT, I felt much, much better, and my sleep quality was better as well. So, yeah, it's important to get enough sleep. So let me just, before I move on, I'm just going to have a quick look just to see any comments that I've got on here. So we've got, that's good to know. I was 42 and felt my hormones were changing. So yeah, and it happens, under the age of 45, it can definitely happen. I've got PMDD. Yes, I experienced this last year and still do. Also seems to be a common co-occurring condition in the neurodivergent community. I 100% agree. And also that's who I was thinking of when I talked about estrogen being too high and making things worse for people. It actually can really affect people who've got very sensitive brains, especially in the neurodivergent community as well, as you've said. We've got intermittent fasting. Should be cycled at this time of life, from what I'm gleaning, adapting to the cycle, like with the carb cycling. So intermittent fasting can work for people. That's one of the things that I do, and it's really helped. But other nutritionists would say don't skip meals because it would increase your appetite later on in the day. I don't know. You got to do what's right for you. It works for me. And if it works for you, fantastic. So how to start treating menopause. So we're going to look at HRT in particular. That's what I wanted to cover today. It's very dependent on your situation. So obviously there's no one size fits all here, but you might sort of recognize some of the things that you need to be aware of in your own situation. So if you have your womb, it's very important that you are given both estrogen and progesterone, and they have to be in a balanced combination. So there's no point having loads of estrogen and a tiny dribble of progesterone, because that's not balanced. That doesn't necessarily keep the womb safe. And there's not a lot of data about high doses of estrogen and low doses of progesterone being safe enough to keep the womb under control, basically. Because if we gave estrogen to somebody with a womb and we didn't give them progesterone, the lining of their womb would thicken up, and in 10 years time, 15 years time, we may then cause cancer in their womb. So that is very important. If you've got a womb, make sure you're given the two hormones in combination. Okay, if you don't have your womb, then you only need estrogen. There is a slight caveat to that, in that if you've got a history of endometriosis, you may need both, because if you've still got any risk of deposits, or it was quite an advanced stage of endometriosis when your womb was removed, then you don't want to exacerbate or worsen any remaining potential spots inside the stomach or wherever the spots are in your body. So in that situation, your surgeon may advise you to be on be on a combined combination of estrogen and progesterone. If you've had just the body of the womb removed, but the cervix has been left behind, then you need to do something called a trial of the cervical stump. And that means using the combined hormones in a way that would bring on a bleed if you had your womb. But if any of the lining is left in the top of the cervix, which sometimes can happen, then we should be able to see a bleed. It doesn't always work that way, but hopefully it would reveal itself, and then we'd know you need to have both, because you still have something that responds to the hormones in there. If after 3 months there's been no bleeding whatsoever, then we're told that we can stop the progesterone and just use estrogen only, but we have to do that trial first. So there we go. That's kind of it in a nutshell. And then we need to be thinking about, okay, how are we going to give it? So you've got transdermal estrogen, which is estrogen that goes through the skin, and then you've got oral estrogen as well. Now, I think I've put transdermal estrogen as best from it's. I should put on there it from a blood clot perspective. So transdermal estrogen doesn't increase somebody's risk of a blood clot over and above what their background risk already is. So people who have got a higher risk of a blood clot or a stroke, like someone that has got high blood pressure, for example, or has a clotting disorder, they should be on transdermal estrogen because it doesn't increase someone's risk. Oral estrogen, on the other hand, can slightly increase somebody's risk of a blood clot, but it's not something. I think the more and more I learn around this, the less and less worried I am about that. When I first started learning about this, oral estrogen used to really worry me, but it does less and less now, because I've realized the risks are actually pretty low. So unless you have got a clotting disorder, or there's a reason why you can't have oral estrogen, like you've got a liver disease problem, then actually oral medication can be a good option for you, particularly if the skin routes don't work for you. So I've put transdermal estrogen and body identical progestogen. So this is kind of like the optimum. If we could get it and it works really well for you, it means that we are trying to mimic and match your own body's hormones as close as we possibly can. We're never going to get there completely. There are some people out there that advocate the use of what's called bioidentical hormones, and apparently they're able to mix up somebody's unique needs in their labs, in their clinic rooms, and it matches what their body is supposed to need. I don't subscribe to that. I'm a British menopause trained menopause specialist. So for me, it's about body identical. We know that that's been tested. There's research behind it. The doses are quantified properly. Yes, sometimes the balance can be off between the ones that we give if we're giving it in a separate preparation, but it's not like bio where we're just kind of making it up as we go along. This is a set procedure and a set dose that's given. So things that people might want to use would be something like utrogestan, for example. That is a body identical progestogen. I've put Mirena on there. It's not a body identical progestogen. It's a synthetic progestogen, but it's said to be one of the most safest ways of protecting the womb from the estrogen. So we actually started a coil clinic in Milton Keynes as well precisely for women that want to have a Mirena coil fitted. So that they can protect their womb lining. But there's a number of different ways of doing it. So Utrogestan is one option, Mirena is another option. There are several other types of progesterone tablets you could have. They've all got their own risks and benefits. I'd be here all day if I went into everything, but that's essentially the kind of things that somebody would offer you. And I've put on there estrogel, I've put patches, I've put Lenzetto spray. So all of these things are just different methods of giving you estrogen. And some people really love the gel, other people like the patches, some people will try one, switch to another later on. It doesn't matter. As long as there's something that fits for you and it works well, then great. Now, if you don't have a womb, then you only need estrogen only. As I said, apart from the caveats that I've said to you, the estrogen only would be your gels, your patches, your sprays. You can have plain oral estrogen as well, as long as you don't have that additional blood clot risk with it as well. Now, the way that you would start treating this, start your cycle off, it depends on whether or not you're still bleeding. So if you're still having periods, then you need to be on this combination. It's called cyclical or sequential HRT, depending on what you read. And essentially what you're doing is you are trying to time it so that you are giving yourself progesterone when your body is naturally high in progesterone. So that's the second half of your cycle. So that's from ovulation through to the point where you bleed. And then in the first half of your cycle, you're just using estrogen. So it's a little bit more faffy, I guess, if you're gonna look at it that way. But if you use combined patches, then all you do is you just follow the box, and the box will tell you for 2 weeks use this type, for 2 weeks use that type, for 2 weeks use this type, and then use that type. And what I sometimes see happening is if people just start these and they don't try and time it with their cycle, sometimes their bleeding pattern can go a little bit awry. So I have had some women who have had bleeds several times throughout the month. Other women have found that actually their bleeding is happening at the wrong point of their cycle, and that's because you are still having fluctuations in your own hormones. Your body is not fighting against the HRT, but is kind of augmenting it, so that if you do have a change or a swing or a drop in your hormones and the HRT perhaps isn't enough at that point for you, then yes, you probably will have a bleed. So we just have to be mindful that we might not get it completely right, but over time it should settle. So we don't want to see it like that all the time, because then that suggests that we haven't got the balance right. But in the first sort of 3 to 6 months, we might find that it's a bit all over the place, and then over time it should get better. And some people even notice that their bleeding gets lighter as well. Now, when you are 12 months with no bleeding, you can go on what's called continuous HRT. So this is where you are not trying to time it with your cycle, because you're not having them anymore, but you can take the hormones in the same dose all the way through. So your progesterone and your estrogen all the time, every single day, no 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, no messing around, no timing it, nothing. That also applies if somebody is using perhaps the mini pill, for example, and their bleeding has stopped, or they're on the injection and their bleeding has stopped and they're using that for contraception, and we can add the HRT on top of that. But we do have to be mindful of the types of progesterones that we can use for safety. So we off license can use 2 tablets of the desogestrel pill or 3 tablets of Nora-Day, and that covers the progesterone protection as well as contraception. And then you add the estrogen on top. You can have a Mirena coil and estrogen. There's lots of things you can do with that. But essentially, if you're not having a period, you don't need to be on the sequential type. You can be on the continuous. There's nothing wrong if you're accidentally put on one or the other. But if you go on continuous too early, that could cause very erratic, heavy bleeding if your womb's not ready to do that yet. And likewise, if you're on the sequential type, but actually your womb's ready for the continuous type, you might have no bleeding at all, in which case we could just try changing you over. But everyone's very different, and you just have to try and see what your body's saying to you. But certainly by the age of 54, I'd expect all women to be on the continuous type, because long term, it's better to be on the continuous type for the safety of your womb. Okay, so hopefully that hasn't completely thrown everybody, but essentially it depends if you're bleeding or not. That's how we would give it. So I've spoken about the caveats, so I'm not going to go into that again. So Some of the things that can happen, as I said, in the first 3 to 6 months, bleeding can change. So you might get more erratic bleeding, you might get heavier bleeding, you might get no bleeding. It should settle, whichever pattern it's going to go into, it should settle by 3 to 6 months. But if it's ongoing, if it's becoming heavy, it's a problem, it needs to be investigated. We need to make sure that that's okay. The good news is that if you are on combined HRT and you're not skipping doses and you're taking it as you're prescribed it, and it's the estrogen and the progesterone are balanced, then your risk of something like a womb cancer is far less than 1%. If, however, you're using estrogen only and you're using progesterone as and when you want to use it, then there is that risk. So you have to balance that out. There are things we can do. So I've put on there, we could try increasing the dose of progesterone, we can switch to a Mirena, we could add in a mini pill, we could change the type of progesterone to see if that makes a difference. You can, in the very extreme cases, have your womb removed. I mean, that does happen. So some people they can't tolerate the progesterone, the bleeding's too high, whatever it is, they don't want to have a coil, or they can't have a coil, or whatever, so they have the womb removed. So it's quite an extreme way of doing it, but it's one of the options. But the benefits, I think, far outweigh the risks of the bleeding and things like that. You've got benefits for your brain health, your skin health, your hair, your heart, your cholesterol levels, your blood pressure, your mental health. It literally impacts so many things in our bodies. And when you do that questionnaire, you'll see there are lots of symptoms on there, like tinnitus, for example. I didn't know that was a symptom, but apparently it is. So if you're having that, or you're having lots of headaches or something, HRT may actually be the thing that helps get rid of those symptoms for you, or at least make them bearable. The other risk that people worry about is breast cancer. So this is on the Women's Health Concern website. It's a really useful website made by the British Menopause Society. It says all their patient leaflets, all based on research. And what they're saying is, naturally, in the UK, women between the ages of 50 and 59 so 23 of them out of 1,000 would naturally go on to develop breast cancer. That's in the background risk of the population. That's not including people that have got, genetic problems or anything like that. This is just background risk. If somebody is on HRT with both of those hormones, it increases that background risk by an extra 4 women. So an extra 4 women would develop that out of 1,000, which is not a lot. It's not a huge amount at all. And it's actually the progesterone we need to be more concerned about, not the estrogen. Because when you look at estrogen only HRT, that reduces somebody's risk by 4. So if somebody's had their womb removed and they just have estrogen, then their risk of breast cancer has got lower. So it's not the estrogen, it's the progesterone that we are more concerned with, okay? Now, it's the same for the combined pill. It's similar for women that drink more, or people that drink more. It's similar for people who smoke. And if you see here, if someone has got a BMI of over 30, their risk goes up by double. So it's very important to look at weight management, increasing your muscle bulk, muscle mass, to help your body to metabolize what you're eating, so that you can try and reduce the weight as much as you can. Now, I know BMI is a really crude way of recording something. You might have someone who's very, very fit and healthy and their BMI comes out over 30. And I'm not saying that that's true to life at all, but it's just what the research says. And they unfortunately still use these arbitrary figures because that's the only thing that they've got, even though it wasn't initially designed for that. Now, the reasoning behind it is it's mainly around body fat. So if someone's got a BMI of 30 and they're full of muscle, it's not the same. If someone's BMI is over 30 and it's because they've got extra body fat, it's the fat cells themselves that produce a type of estrogen that has the impact on the womb. So women who are overweight are at a background risk of things like endometrial cancer, so womb cancer, as well as breast cancer, because of that factor. Okay, so that's the distinction that I want you to make of that. And then at the bottom there, improvements are made when somebody exercises 2.5 hours moderate exercise per week. So that would be something like 30 minutes a day walking to get a little bit out of breath, things like that. So there we go. I hope that has helped you feel better about taking HRT if breast cancer was one of those things that was on your mind. There's actually a really good book that I recommend to people to read, and it's just gone out of my brain. It will come to me in a minute. It's on my bookshelf, so I'll be able to share that with you. But it's really good. It talks about estrogen and its impact on the body, and how the research back in the 90s was massively blown out of proportion. So it's a really good book to read. Anyway, these are some of the points from the book that I thought were excellent. So if estrogen was an important cause of breast cancer, then rates would decline after the menopause, but they don't. And it should be higher in pregnant women and in younger women. But we don't worry about breast cancer in a pregnant woman. Yeah, her estrogen is 10 times higher in her circulation, yet they don't develop breast cancer. So it's not about the estrogen. It's a disease of older age. Cardiovascular disease, importantly, is actually a main cause of death in women, because breast cancer is so well treated now that actually the death rates from breast cancer are much, much lower, whereas the deaths from, say, a heart attack are much, much higher. We're much more likely to die of a circulatory problem than we are of breast cancer, yet we don't talk about that. But being mindful of smoking and exercise and weight and what we're eating and everything is going to have far bigger impacts on not only our menopausal symptoms, but also on our overall long-term health as well. So, should you take it if you've got breast cancer? So vaginal estrogen now can be given if you've been treated for breast cancer. And that doesn't matter whether you're on tamoxifen or any of the other post-cancer treatments that are given. You can be on vaginal estrogen. Now, the experts would say use vaginal lubricants and moisturizers and things first before you go on to vaginal estrogen. But the consensus is now that you're okay to do it. And I've put on here, speak to your oncologist, breast specialist if you're worried, but most people would say now it's absolutely fine, just go for it. There we go. I wrote the book on my slides. Avram Blooming is the author, and the book is called Estrogen Matters. Yeah, so make your own informed decision about what you feel about breast cancer. He talks about breast cancer risk and taking HRT afterwards. He's saying that because we're so good at treating breast cancer now, that we're actually putting women into a far worse menopausal situation than perhaps they would have done beforehand, because they're on things like tamoxifen, which is important. It must be done, but we are making people feel more unwell for a longer period of their life. So actually, are we going to start moving towards giving HRT back to women who are in that phase of their life? Maybe we will. So it's an interesting conclusion that he draws. And I've also spoken about vaginal estrogen, so that it can be given. You don't need a specialist to tell you that, but you might want to talk to a specialist about taking HRT with breast cancer. And certainly most GPs would not be happy to prescribe that to you if you've got a history of breast cancer. If you've got just a family risk of breast cancer, then actually menopause specialists would still give it to you. If you've got lots of cancers going on in your family, then you might want a genetic assessment first of all to see what your overall risk would be. And certainly if you are BRCA positive, because your mother and sister and auntie and everyone has got breast cancer on one side of the family, then I would think twice about it, and I would certainly get a genetic assessment before starting anything. But if it's a tenuous thing, a cousin or your nan or somebody else had breast cancer in the family, and they're not directly related to you, and it's not multiple people in the family, and it's not a young age, then you'll be fine. You'll be all right on HRT. You just have to make sure that you are breast aware, pick up any lumps or bumps, get them checked out early, go for your mammograms, things like that. Okay. The other risk factor that I've kind of alluded to is blood clots. So I've spoken about oral estrogen and transdermal estrogen, and I've put on here transdermal estrogen is VTE neutral. So it's said to not increase somebody's risk of a blood clot or a stroke, because it's going directly into the bloodstream where it's needed and not through the gut and the liver and the circulation. For the oral side of things, it can increase. So I've put on here, background risk of a blood clot for a 50-year-old woman is 6 per 10,000 per year. Very small risk. So when we give oral estrogen, we're actually only increasing that to 12 in 10,000. Still a small risk. So as I've gone through more training and more nuanced about this, I've come to feel okay about giving people oral estrogen and progestogen because the risks are still small. Of course, if someone's got an increased risk of a blood clot or a stroke anyway, I would not want to go down that route. But for the average person, it would still be okay. And if you don't get on with the patches and gels and sprays, then actually oral estrogen might be your best bet. And some people feel so much better on it. So why not give the preparation that works? So I'm going to just go back again just to see what people are saying, just to see, just before we move on. So Dr. Louise Newson, the definitive guide to perimenopause and menopause is one you recommended to me, and estrogen matters. Yes. Oh, thank you, Amanda, for saying that. Yeah. So Dr. Louise Newson's book, I think it's really helpful. It's actually really simplistic to read. I found it really helpful to read myself. So yeah, I like that one. And then the estrogen matters book is definitely another one of my favorites. And Karen said, I couldn't remember the name, but I knew it was going to be the one you told me about as well. So there we go. And then I'm getting a lot of monthly bleeding on a 3-week cycle on a Mirena. So my HRT has been increased, hoping it helps. Fingers crossed it does for you. Sometimes the Mirena doesn't quite capture everything on the bleeding front, but fingers crossed it does that for you as well. Oh, another book recommendation, Davina's Menopausing. Yes, that's a good one too. So fabulous. Let's move on. So we're going to talk about testosterone. I want to try and get through this bit, and then we'll do questions and things as well. So women produce apparently 4 times more testosterone in their fertile years than they do estrogen. And the adrenal gland makes up about 50% of testosterone in the body, and then the ovaries are the others. Now, we know that it's helpful for libido, but then so is estrogen. We know that it's helpful for vaginal lubrication, but so is estrogen. Memory, concentration, mood, motivation, all of those things, it will respond to estrogen. But for some people, they can go on, very good doses of estrogen, have very good levels in their blood, and still don't feel right. And in those people, it might be that they need some testosterone. And I've put on there, if no resolution of symptoms with standard HRT, you might need to add that in as well. Not everybody needs it, but some people do. Testosterone doesn't decline like estrogen does in the menopausal years. It kind of very slowly drifts down. So it might be worth a try, but it's not the only thing you can do for things like libido and vaginal lubrication. Yeah, so there's other things that can be done as well. But it is something that particularly women who are going through POI or they've had their ovaries removed, then yes, absolutely, that would be something to think about. It's not licensed, unfortunately, for women in the UK, and it's actually known as a controlled drug. So you'll find that there'll be some GPs that really will not want to prescribe this because in their area, it's either specialist only, or you just can't get hold of it, or there's a lot of resistance to it because of that. And it's not the GP's fault, it's their area. So if their area is said that you can only use it if you're a specialist, then a lot of GPs will just have a blanket policy of, we do not prescribe this, and that's it. So you have to then go private to get that done. If you have it on the NHS, you will be given the male version, and it's a little silver sachet. I mean, you can get a gel pump as well, but Testogel is one example, and you only need a little bit of it. So a man would use a whole sachet, but women only need 1/8 of a sachet, and it works out to be it's like a little blob, like a little pea-sized blob, basically. And you do that every day, and then you throw the sachet away after 8 days. So it's not ideal, but there we go. And all the information leaflets will all be geared up towards men as well. And you won't be able to speak to any of the reps about it because it's off license. So for them, they just say, no, speak to a doctor about it. So it's hard, but that's what we have. Now, if you get it privately, you can be prescribed something called Androfem. Now, it's the same, basically. Some people find that it's better from a symptom point of view. I'm not so sure. I'm not convinced yet that it is. It is the only one that's been produced with women in mind. It's got a little syringe thing that you can use to try and get the dose out. But speaking to people that have used it, I'm not sure there's much benefit over just using a little bit of a sachet, to be honest. So if you have to have it imported, it's going to be expensive, of course. I think it's about £90 a month or something. I can't remember now what the last figure was, but it's a lot. Whereas the tester gel is £30, and that lasts for ages because you get 30 sachets in a box. If you buy it and you get given a whole box, places like Superdrug will only give you 3 sachets, and it's £18 for 3, and that only covers you for a month. So there are swings and roundabouts with it, but it's cheaper to go on the male version and just use it in the female hormonal range. But there is this other stuff you can get if you go privately and you want to pay for the prescriptions. And I will warn you that if you get that prescription, you will have to keep paying for it yourself privately, because your NHS GP will not prescribe it for you. They might do the tester gel, but certainly they wouldn't do Androfem until it comes into this country and it's in our formularies and we can use it. So let's have a little look. So testosterone testing. Is there a best time of the cycle to get the test? I'm due to have it, but have been told it's likely weeks before I'll get in. So no is the answer. It's not the same as when you're trying to time female hormones. So you can have it tested anytime, basically. So that would be okay. Yeah, it's frustrating, but we do have to keep an eye on testosterone levels and things as well. So once somebody's on it, I would suggest that you have your testosterone level checked about 12 weeks afterwards, 10, 12 weeks, something like that, and a review. If it's fine, have it checked again at 6 months, and then have it checked again at 12 months, and then have it annually thereafter, basically, just to make sure it doesn't go too high, because you don't want it to be too high, because then we'll start having side effects from it. Another part of this is GSM, so genitourinary symptoms of the menopause. Is a very big part of it. Apparently 70 to 80% of women are affected by vaginal symptoms, but only about 8% of women are actually on something to help them. So this will be things like dryness, painful intercourse, burning, stinging, itching, lots of urine infections all the time. It often could be one of the early signs that something's changing. And there's lots of things you can do. It's not just about suffering in silence. Once you're on HRT, that might be enough to help, but some people also need lubrication, they need moisturizers. There's lots of different versions out there. You've got vaginal estrogen, so you can have pessaries, creams, rings. There's all sorts of things you can use now. And there's also this other thing as well. It's called Intrarosa. It's DHEA, and it's a type of testosterone. It breaks down into estrogen and testosterone, and that can really help the vagina as well. So there's lots of things that can be given. Okay, so don't suffer if you're getting any of those symptoms. Just get someone to have a look, basically. Okay. And then we just think about contraception as well. So ideally, everyone should be on contraception to the age of 55 if it's necessary. Obviously, it's not necessary for everybody, but if it is, then ideally to the age of 55, you can have your FSH levels checked, but you just have to be mindful that it's not always accurate. And even if you've got an FSH level that's in the menopausal range, it does not necessarily mean that you are sterile and that you can't get pregnant, because some people can, because occasionally you might release that one egg 1 month and it's bad timing. So contraception till the age of 55 if necessary, and then you can stop, and that should be the end of it. HRT alone is not contraceptive unless you're using something like a Mirena. Just be mindful of it, basically, particularly if you're under the age of 50. I always tell the story of my grandma who got pregnant in her late 40s because she thought she was done and dusted, but she wasn't. She had POI, so she had intermittent fertility, and 1 month was fertile, and lo and behold got pregnant. So there we go, it does happen. And financially, speak to your employer if you're struggling and you need some time off, because it's really hard at this time of life. There's lots of things happening. Kids might be growing up, or you might have young kids still. You might have elderly parents that need help. Lots of things going on. So if you need help from your employer, a bit of time off or some workplace adjustments, and ask for it. In fact, I'm going to have somebody coming to join me in a webinar at some point when we've worked out the date. It's going to talk all about this side of things. Think about using the HRT prepayment certificate. If you're not on any other medication at all, then actually you pay £19.30, and it gives you unlimited HRT for a year. It doesn't cover testosterone, but it covers majority of other types of HRT. You just have to be careful of the list, because not completely everything is covered. So yeah, all of those things. And don't be tempted to kind of drop out of your work. Get help. Don't stop, paying into your pensions and things like that. It's important to keep going with it, because this is the time of your life where actually it's the best time to contribute to these things. So yeah, just a little bit on finances there. So there's some things I'm going to put in your pack on that website I'm going to show you in a minute. Some questions for you to go through. Use the symptom tracker, keep an eye on your periods, track your symptoms, and then speak to your GP with all of that in hand. Read about HRT, some of the books that have been mentioned. There's loads of resources out there, but there's some in that website that I'm going to show you in a minute. And seek additional support if you need it, second, third opinions, whatever you need. So now we're going to talk a little bit about your questions and things. I appreciate I've gone on for a while. There's a lot to cover, but you've done brilliantly to be there with me. So if there's anything you want to ask, just pop it in the box. But these are some of the ones I got ahead of time. So what do you do if HRT stops working? Should I increase my dose or switch to another type? So basically there was two ladies that asked two separate questions, but essentially on the same lines. So if HRT stops working, I would question, is the dose right? So I always start people on kind of a mid-range dose, and sometimes you need to increase that, because over time, you might get used to it, or you might find that actually that dose was initially okay, but it perhaps wasn't quite okay as the perimenopause progresses. So I would look at maximizing the estrogen, not going over and above what's licensed, but certainly looking at that. If you're already on the maximum dose of HRT, then I'd be thinking about the route. So if on patches, are the patches sticking? Are there any problems there? Do we need to be switching over to gel? Do we need to switch over to oral? Before switching over to the oral route, I would probably do an estrogen level as well, just to see what was going on in the blood. And I have picked that up before, where people's levels are very, very low, and no wonder they were feeling awful. And we've just increased the dose a little bit, tweaked things around, and everything's got better and they felt better. So that's a time when checking estrogen would be helpful. And should I increase my dose or switch to another type? Well, as I've said, it depends on whether or not you're absorbing properly. So you might want to get a blood test done. Increasing the dose might be helpful. Do it in stages. You haven't got to go straight to the top. You can do it up in increments and stages, and test things out and try them out and see how you feel. But if it all, nothing's working through the skin, then there is always the oral estrogen way of looking at things as well. But then in the back of your mind, you've got to be thinking, have we got the right diagnosis? Because not everything is menopause. So you have to be thinking that too. There was another one specific to menopause, which is around postmenopause weight gain and recommendations for over-the-counter estrogen medication. So vaginal estrogen is what I would recommend for everybody. You can use that at whatever age you are. And that's to help with dryness and UTIs and things like that. If you've got an elderly relative that's getting a lot of urine infections, or vaginal estrogen actually can be really helpful, and you can get some really gentle preparations, little pessaries, creams, things like that can all be helpful. Postmenopause weight gain, again, it's one of those things that will be not a one size fits all, but certainly the consensus seems to be Mediterranean, good fat type diets, keeping up your muscle mass, improving that, keeping your strength going. All of those things can help raise your metabolism, which then keeps the weight down. But it's not a one size fits all approach. So I would definitely work with a nutritionist or someone if you're struggling in that sense. And then there was another question about fibroids and clots and things, and what's acceptable and what's not. It's not strictly menopause. So it essentially, there's a big answer to that. So I think probably what I'll do is I'll park that one and I'll do that one at another stage and do a proper thing on it, because it needs a little bit of its own justification. So there we go. So that's it. So if you're not watching this on the Facebook group, then come and find us if you can. It's Women's Health Support UK. If you're not sure, just email me. It's not a problem. Look at my mailing list as well, so you can come and join that, and I'll tell you about any upcoming webinars and tell you when my clinic's going live and all that stuff as well. So there are a couple of things you could do. And as I said to you, I've also got the option here, this QR code. Hopefully you can see that all right. So if you can scan that one, I'll put the link up for you as well in the group afterwards. In fact, I'll put it on this so you can see it. There we go. So that's the link to the website, but you can use that QR code as well. So just take a photo of that, or you can get the link now. It should take you through to that one, and then that will give you lots of resources. There's that symptom checker thing that I spoke about. There's the speaker bios of all the people that I'm going to have lined up over hopefully the next couple of months, which should have been today, but unfortunately weren't. So yeah, there's lots of things in there you can start looking at. There's also a little feedback form. Some of it won't be relevant because it's based on an event in person, but if you have a few minutes spare, then a little bit of feedback's always helpful so that I'm on the right track, or if there's anything I need to amend, change, improve, add, take away, whatever, it's always helpful. So we've got a couple of questions, as I'll leave that QR code up at the moment so you can have a look at that. Karen has said, what are some of the pros and cons of taking the mini pill to stop versus allowing the body to stop periods naturally? So there is no advantage to having a period. I can only see disadvantages to having periods, in all honesty. So we do not need to have them. So in which case, if you are under the age of 55 and you want to control your periods and stop them, then a mini pill can work very, very well for that. If you don't want to go down the coil route, or the injection route. In fact, women over the age of 50 probably shouldn't be going on the injection anyway, because of the bone thinning risk. But certainly, the mini pill is one to use. A double dose desogestrel or triple dose Noriday, both can be absolutely fine for endometrial protection from the BMS resources. So the pros are you're not bleeding. Hopefully you're not going to be in pain, you're not going to be having horrible cramps. You can get onto the continuous combined version of HRT more quickly, which means hopefully that's more protective for your womb. I mean, the jury's out on that one, but certainly long term being on continuous combined HRT is better. The cons, well, you've got to take an additional tablet. And someone like Louise Newsom, for example, they don't really like giving people things like mini pills because they don't like the synthetic progestogens. They much prefer for someone to be on a body identical, which is what I've spoken about, the transdermal or the Utrogestan. But that doesn't always work for everybody. So sometimes we do need to add in that mini pill as well. So hopefully that's answered your question. Liz, very timely, has been thinking a lot about this topic. Yeah, good. I'm glad that that's been helpful. And Nancy, I'm really glad that that's been a great introduction for you. Yeah, there's a lot to cover. So I'm hoping that you'll come away from this and you'll feel like you can have a conversation with your GP and take it forward and get the treatment that you need, basically. So yeah, there we go. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me. And I'm going to just have a look just to see if there are any comments on here. So let's remove that one. So my Instagram one has stopped, so that's fine. It gets to an hour and then it just conks out, so that's fine. I'm having a look. I can't see anybody on YouTube that said anything. A little while back. 43, been taking HRT for 3 months and testosterone, but my sleep is still awful. It's just still awful, especially near the time of period starting. So again, I'd want to know what dose you're on. So what dose HRT are you on? What type of HRT are you taking? It's only been 3 months. Testosterone, I would say if you're getting to 3 to 6 months, it's not making any difference. Is it actually benefiting you? Yeah, and sleep is a complicated one. It's not necessarily just about HRT and menopause. It might be the environment you're in, how you're teeing yourself up to get to sleep. Have you got a good routine getting into bed, making sure you're not using screens, put your electronics away. Some people are really sensitive to electrics in the room, so putting your phone downstairs, keeping that out of the way. Some people really like magnesium, so that's something you can look at as a supplement. Can't tell you doses off the top of my head, but something to explore. Valerian root, that can be helpful. That's in things like nitol. You could try that. There's medicinal versions of nitol you could try. There's a really good book, again, more books, I love a book, and it's called Why We Sleep, and it's by someone called Matthew Walker, I believe, and his whole life's work is all around sleep and literally why we sleep. And it's really helpful to read as well. So you might find that useful to go through. So it does give you the justifications for keeping the lights low, making sure that you're taking the electrics out of the room, not jumping straight into medication if you can avoid it, things like that. Sometimes it's also blood sugar. So if you're not eating before you go to bed, your blood sugar might be dropping, and that might be keeping you awake as well. So there's lots and lots of things to explore about sleep. So good luck with that. I hopefully that helps, but certainly have a look at that HRT and just make sure you're on a good dose. And if you're on the transdermal estrogen through the skin, get someone to check your estrogen levels as well. Orally, it doesn't work so well, but certainly through the skin, give it a try. Anyone else on YouTube that I can see? No. So someone's just said they've started on magnesium as my sleep has got worse. So yeah, the option was 200 milligrams, and there we go. So that's a recommendation. This is why these groups are so great, and I want people to put questions in the groups in future, because we're going to get answers like this, and it's helpful. We can all share information here. So fabulous. All right, well, I'm really glad that this has helped with everyone's understanding. So I'm going to love you and leave you, because that's a lot to take in. There's a lot to think about there, but go and look at the resources, start tracking your symptoms, and fingers crossed you'll get some help with it. I appreciate that not everybody's going to get the same level of treatment all the way across the country, but maybe you'll come and see me in my private clinic, because I'm going to be doing online appointments as well as telephone and in person. So if that's something you're struggling with, then I'd be very happy to see you. Okay, so there we go. Have a lovely evening, everybody, and I'm so glad you enjoyed it, and I'm really glad to be back doing these again, because it's taken obviously the events of last year have really taken me out, so I'm really glad I'm here and we can get these going again. So I'll keep you up informed of everything that's going on with future webinars. Once I've got the other ladies involved and what dates they can do, I will be letting you all know. So you take care. Have a lovely evening. Bye.